I want to talk a little bit about the regulatory scene in the space that you're in. You just mentioned your clinical programs, and we'll get into that a little bit more deeply later on in the conversation. But being in a space that's not super well charted from a regulatory standpoint, what's been your experience with the regulators as you've moved those programs into the clinic?
Yeah, our experience with the regulators overall has been good, but we've noticed that the FDA has a kind of on the genetic medicines where our program is going to fall, specifically the RNA therapeutics. So the FDA has a very conservative approach to that, very much focused on risk, much less focused on benefit. And so that has basically driven us to start our clinical work outside of the United States. So QurAlis is running programs. We have now 3 programs. They're running in 6 different countries, in Canada, the UK, Belgium, Netherlands, Ireland, and Germany, and not in the US. And we found out that a lot of other companies are doing the exact same thing. And when I started to talk around and like, are we the only people that like think that we shouldn't start in the US? We actually found out that almost every company that we talk to has that opinion, because it creates just a regulatory risk and a hurdle, and why would you take that basically if you don't have to? And so we've brought together a consortium of companies. It's now 11 companies. With we as a kind of the founding members are QurAlis, Stoke Therapeutics, Avidity Bio, Ultragenics, and we brought together other companies to really try to catalyze changes and work with the FDA to see if we can build more of a risk-benefit approach into the regulatory pathway. So I think the FDA in particular has done a lot of really good things on the back end, trying to get to surrogate endpoints, biomarkers. Alzheimer's has been a remarkable step forward there with amyloid in ALS, where we are currently with our programs. A big step forward because of neurofilament for the SOD1 population. So I think there's been a big development and evolution in a positive way on getting drugs maybe faster through the development pipeline and maybe faster to an accelerated approval. But on the front end, there's been a very rigid system. And so we think that there should be improvements there. And so we've made that from the consortium. We've made a case to the FDA. I went to the Rare Disease Hub Day, which was organized in October. I presented there, Stoke presented there, Avidity presented there. There were a number of other companies that were presenting there as well. And we made it clear that we'd like to work with the FDA because they made this important step on creating a rare disease hub to see if there could be ways in which we can also smooth this process. Because at this moment, American innovation is basically leaving the United States, and it's not benefiting American patients. And that is kind of a broken system.
Is it your feeling that the regulators have been open to listening and collaborating with you? Do you feel like you've been able to move the needle as a company?
Yes, I think there are differences also in the way CBER and CDER operate. But Peter Marks was there, Patricia Cavazzoni was there, and I was able to connect with both of them. And you don't get commitments there right there on the spot. But there was definitely a positive attitude and an understanding that this wasn't the first time that they heard about it, right? Like other companies have, but this is the first time that I think the companies have kind of united. And I know the large pharmaceutical companies have the exact same viewpoints because I talked to all of them because we're all working together.
Yeah.
But there's definitely an understanding and there was an appreciation that and a willingness, I think, to make improvements. And so the FDA has then put out a call to get written feedback, and then recently also put out a call for oligonucleotide therapy, so what could be an improvement for the regulatory framework. And again, on behalf of the consortium, we have provided that. And that was just submitted like 2 days ago. And so it all takes time. But
Sure.
I think there is definitely there are things moving in hopefully in a positive direction. But obviously, Rob Califf stepped down, so we're going to get a new commissioner. Patricia Cavazzoni just announced to step down, so we also have to see who's going to be there to work with.
Sure.
So hopefully that will not create too much chaos, and we can continue to move in a positive manner.
I was going to ask where you feel, I mean, it sounds like there's a concerted effort that, I guess, to continue to apply, not pressure, but influence. And I was going to ask where perhaps you feel as though influence is limited or metered, like where more work needs to be done. But it sounds like that's kind of TBD depending on some administrative positioning.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I knew Rob was going to leave, but Patricia's departure, I think, was a surprise to everyone. And so now we're going to have to see who we should work with. But I think the reason why it's so important is that this is the time of genetic medicine. This is the time of RNA therapeutics. You can see a lot of different companies active in this space. The genetic insights into disease, the thing that got me interested to develop therapies for ALS, because the genetics gives us a real handle on how to treat this disease. The best way to do that is probably through genetic medicine, because the two kind of like link very nicely together. But you have to have a different approach to that than you have for small molecules or antibodies. And so there's a real a need, I think, for us to all evolve rapidly with these new technologies, and also from a regulatory side. And so we will continue to communicate that very strongly to the FDA and whoever will be the new leaders of CDER and the FDA themselves, because there's no time to lose, basically.
Yeah.
You're an admitted optimist. How realistic do you think interagency collaboration is and greater harmonization?
Well, I think harmonization can be good, but harmonization can also be bad. It depends on who's harmonizing to whom, right?
What part harmony are we discussing here?
But that there are a lot of things I don't completely understand. I know that the EMA and the FDA are connecting, Health Canada, the MHRA, that there's a lot of also like higher level conversations. The experiences that we've had with QurAlis is that regulators in different countries have a different way of looking at things. And so I think that's fine. And maybe it's good. I'm a big believer in group thinking and a diversity of opinions. It's also good if they communicate a lot so that they can learn from each other. But I'm mostly an optimist because I believe that everyone wants the same thing. Like everyone has family members who have been sick or who have passed away, or you're afraid of family members or friends getting sick or passing away. We all want medicine. We all want to have treatments for diseases. I've met so many people now that have ALS or have passed away from ALS or have family members or friends that have the disease. And that's just one disease, right? It's the same in oncology, it's the same in epilepsy, you name it. Everyone wants treatments. And so if you use that, then we should all be able to find common grounds to do the right things and to make a framework that supports therapy development. So I'm very optimistic because I think it's common sense. Like, I don't know why anyone wouldn't want to do that.
Well, and I think ALS has one of the more active patient advocacy communities. That wasn't the original Ice Bucket Challenge around ALS. Support, does that help you, in your role at QurAlis?
Yes, the Ice Bucket Challenge was really created by Pete Frates, and the ALS Association has really lifted that, I think, to a global awareness. It has been incredibly important for ALS because I think most people had not even heard of the disease before the Ice Bucket Challenge. Now everyone knows about the disease. It has also brought a lot of money to the foundation and to other organizations. And one of my fellowships when I was working at Harvard was from the ALS Association. So, in a way, the research that has also led to the creation of QurAlis is I think, directly supported by money from the Ice Bucket Challenge, Milton Safe Bridge Fellowship. So, yes, I think the that type of awareness and that action has been incredibly important.
You referenced this, I guess the risk of the exodus of clinical activity and innovation away from the FDA, because there are perhaps lower barriers in other regulatory jurisdictions. That's to say, you didn't even mention Australia, which has been one of the major sort of siphons of clinical activity away from the US. What would you call on the space to do? Like you've been like admirably active in calling for and influencing change. What would you call on the rest of the space to do? Like what levers might they have to push and pull to sort of join the effort? And do you see enough activity going on in the greater landscape?
Well, once you start doing these things, you notice how many other companies are doing that. I think the weakness, I think, is that companies advocate for themselves a lot and don't unite enough to have a united message. Because if one company goes and is lobbying for in this case the FDA to look at its own processes, it feels like that company is just trying to help themselves.
Right.
And no one likes that, because that just feels kind of like, it doesn't feel good. It's like you're trying to skew the system in your own benefit, but that's not what we're trying to do. There's definitely something not working in the system, and the fixing that will benefit everyone. And so we've done a lot of background conversations also with companies that maybe don't want to publicly be part of a consortium, but that we have the same message, so that the same message is being heard over and over and over again. So because in the end, if you give 10 different messages to someone, they can't remember any of it, right? I think someone remembers maybe 3 things very well. So you want to make sure that you have your priorities straight as a whole biotech sector, and that you give the same message, even if it is not part of our consortium, but an independent message. And so that is something that we've been doing also with the consortium, and talk to all of the large pharma companies that are active in the ALS space, and we're all aligned. So it's important that we work in that manner, basically.
Yeah.
Maybe we can turn it back to QurAlis's development and clinical assets right now. Could you give us a sense of where you are and maybe what your next big milestones or goals are with your clinical programs?
Yes, I'd be very happy to, Ben. So, and just maybe want to also explain where the clinical programs come from. So the first big discovery that was made using patients' stem cell derived, patient stem cells, which were then generated into neurons, was that there's a loss of a potassium channel called Kv7.2. The loss of that potassium channel leads to neuronal death in these stem cell models. And so if you activate that potassium channel, you can protect against that. We found out it's misspliced. Its pre-mRNA includes a skiptic exon, which turns it into a protein which is rapidly degraded, again, leading to neuronal death. But you can protect against that with a Kv7 opener. So that is something that we have now brought to the clinic. And that program is currently at the end of its phase 1. We've actually run 4 studies in parallel. A MAD study, a multiple ascending dose study to look at tolerability, of course, incredibly important. We've also run a healthy volunteer study to look at biomarkers that predict survival for ALS, but also for epilepsy, to look at biomarkers that predict efficacy in epilepsy, because the potassium channel is also very important for epilepsy. We ran a PK study to look at the 3 different formulations to see which formulations would be best for these different indications. And we've also ran a patient study to see how this compound works in patients. most of that data is reading out at the end of this quarter. And so this is an incredibly important quarter for us. And so we're very excited about looking at the results. Then we have the second big discovery that was made, again, from our co-founder, was the loss of staphin-2, microtubule stabilizer protein, essential for the innervation of your muscle. So your motor neurons protect from your spinal cord all the way to your muscles, for instance, in your hands and in your feet. That innervation is lost when there's a loss of staphin-2. What Kevin discovered is that it's driven by a missplicing event. And when we realized that, it was just after Spinraza was approved for spinal muscular atrophy, a splice correction ASO targeting motor neurons in the spinal cords of SMA patients, showing remarkable effects in those patients. Really a transformative therapy that is marketed by Biotech and has helped so many different patients. We thought we can do that also for restoring staphin-2 levels and bringing staphin-2 levels back to normal, which is, again, is lost in almost every ALS patient. We're at this moment running a dose range finding trial in 6 different countries where patients are dosed intrathecally that have injections into their spinal cord with an ASO, an antisense oligonucleotide that restores these staphin levels. And we are now basically expanding on 2 different dose levels to see which of these dose levels is going to be effective. We're following patients for an extended period of time. We're looking at biomarkers that predict efficacy, neurofilament, and compact muscle action potential, which measures this innervation. And we're going to read that out in the first half of next year.
And what phase are you in on your clinical trials with those 2?
So I would say that is now in a phase 2 phase, but like with these programs, you kind of like adapt from phase 1 to phase 2. With the Kv7, we're at the end of phase 1, and we're planning to start phase 2 trials at the end of the year.
With the Kv7 opener, which prevents the potassium channel from shutting down.
Yes.
Which then prevents the neuronal death. Does that have to be administered very early on after diagnosis of ALS, or when do you have to catch the patient to prevent that from closing?
Yeah, it's a great question. So ALS is a progressive neurodegenerative disease. And so other than, for instance, in Parkinson's, where if you have symptoms, you've lost almost all of your dopaminergic neurons. So there's not a lot to actually protect it. Still, in ALS, when people have developed symptoms, they still have a lot of their motor neurons. And so over time, there's motor neurons that are still healthy, there's motor neurons that are sick, and there's motor neurons that have died. And so obviously at the end of the disease, a lot of neurons have died, but at the beginning, not. So in essence, you can treat anywhere and have an impact on the disease. But in reality, the earlier you treat, the bigger impact you will have on preventing loss of function. So the earlier you treat, the better you are at picking up effects of a potential therapeutic. And so early treatment is I think, has become kind of a norm for all neurodegenerative diseases. Not because the therapies don't work if you treat later, but just because that's where you have the biggest impact on the disease.
We're going to run short on time here, so just a few more questions, and then we'll let you off the hook. No. You're doing great. Terrific responses. This has been a super meaningful conversation. I like the global aspect of it. But in keeping with progress at QurAlis, you mentioned that you were one of the fortunate companies to have a presentation at JP. There's so many biotechs here who don't have opportunities to present at the conference. They're here for the ancillary activity. How did that go?
I mean, it was a great honor to be invited as a private company to present at the JP Morgan conference. So I thought it was a great success. And I think that
I didn't anticipate that you would tell me, oh, it was awful, Matt. It spiraled.
Yeah. Well, we got some good questions back also, because there have been failures in the ALS space. And how do we look at that? I don't want to go too deep into it, but the traditional approach of companies has just been looking at mechanisms that may play a role in disease, and then having a compound or usually a small molecule that acts on that mechanism, and then hoping that it does something. We're following it really from a genetic approach. So we actually we're the leading company in the development of therapeutics for ALS, because we have 3 programs in development on genetic targets. The last one, on 13, is partnered with Eli Lilly, still preclinical. but it's this genetic approach that we know works. And so I've been trying to educate that to people. And so this was a question that we got also at the JP Morgan conference. Just want to give you a little bit more information on that if it's possible.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you, and hopefully this will answer the question, because we spoke like a week or so ago, 2 weeks ago, we had the opportunity to chit chat with you about what we're going to talk about today. And I remember you saying specifically, like, we know it works.
Yeah.
We have the tools.
Yeah.
And you said, now we just need to do it.
Yeah.
Right. So hopefully that question is going to be answered. Like, what's going on right now in terms of, all right, we're going to go from we know it works, now we just need to do it.
Yeah. So the first gene that was discovered for ALS is SOD1, and that was discovered in 1993. It was approved in 2023. So it took 30 years to get to an approval. At this moment, if we understand what is going wrong in the genetics of a disease, we can be in the clinic 4 years later with a genetic medicine. The path from a genetic discovery to a development candidate to an IND to a POC is a scalable path with these genetic medicines, specifically for RNA therapeutics. And so that is very powerful because genetics makes us understand why someone gets sick, not for every disease, but for a lot of diseases, we understand the genetics. We have now the technology to build that into a medicine relatively quickly in a very reproducible manner. And so we have now done at QurAlis, we've made 4 development candidates. We know exactly how long that takes. We know exactly how to do these IND enabling studies. We've done that multiple times as well. And we now have also learned how to actually run POC programs. That's not just for ALS, right? But there's many other diseases where that can be done. And again, that comes back again on why we need also a regulatory framework that fits with that. Because I think as a humanity, you heard me say this in the beginning, no one wants to be sick. No one wants their friends and family members to be sick. We have an opportunity to make really meaningful therapeutics for many different people in a very fast way, relatively to the past, and in a very high probability of success type of manner. But so we need to do it. Yeah.
That's QurAlis founder and CEO Kasper Roet.